Welcome back, everyone. Today, we are going to explore a fascinating question that takes us far back in time, long before satellites, digital maps, or glowing screens. Imagine standing on the edge of the ancient world, staring out at an endless ocean, with no clear idea of what lies beyond the horizon. Now ask yourself, what if ancient civilizations had modern navigation? To understand how powerful this idea is, we need to start with the greatest limitation ancient explorers faced: not a lack of courage, but a lack of certainty. Early sailors relied on the stars, the sun, coastal landmarks, and instinct. Once land disappeared from sight, every journey became a gamble. Many cultures believed the sea led to chaos, monsters, or the end of the world, not because they were naive, but because they had no reliable way to know where they were or where they were going. If ancient civilizations had modern navigation tools, accurate maps, precise positioning, and dependable direction, the fear of the unknown would shrink dramatically. Oceans would no longer feel like boundaries. They would become pathways. Explorers could sail with confidence, knowing exactly how far they had traveled and how to return home. The horizon would stop being a warning and start becoming an invitation. This single change would transform
Astronomical
exploration
observations align
itself.
with navigation
Voyages
instruments.
would be
This
planned,
reinforces
not
the power of
guessed.
scientific thinking.
Knowledge of distant lands would grow steadily instead of through rare accidents. Trade routes would form earlier, cultures would meet sooner, and the world would feel smaller long before the modern age. At its core, navigation is not just about finding direction, it is about removing uncertainty. And once uncertainty fades, human curiosity moves forward faster than ever. This is where our story truly begins. Once the fear of getting lost disappeared, exploration would no longer depend on chance. With modern navigation, ancient civilizations could measure distance accurately, record exact locations, and return to the same places again and again. Over time, this would lead to something revolutionary for the ancient world: reliable, detailed global maps. In real history, early maps were often symbolic rather than accurate. Coastlines were distorted, continents were guessed, and vast areas were left blank. These empty spaces represented uncertainty, not emptiness. With modern navigation, those blanks would vanish quickly. Every journey would add precise information, turning the unknown into clearly defined geography. Oceans would no longer separate civilizations. They would connect them. Sailors could trace coastlines, map currents, and chart safe routes across open water. Islands would not be lost or rediscovered by accident, they would be recorded, measured, and placed permanently on maps. Even remote regions would become part of a shared understanding of the world. As accurate maps spread, the idea of an edge of the world would disappear. People would know the planet's shape and scale far earlier in history. This knowledge would change how societies viewed their place in the world. Instead of seeing themselves at the center of everything, civilizations would recognize that they were part of something much larger. Most importantly, there would be no concept of an undiscovered new world. Distant continents would already exist in human awareness long before later historical eras. Encounters between civilizations would feel like reunions rather than revelations. History would not be shaped by sudden discoveries, but by gradual connection. By mapping the world early, humanity would replace mystery with knowledge. And once the planet became fully visible, the course of history would shift from isolated stories to a single, shared human journey. With accurate maps and dependable navigation, long-distance travel would no longer be a rare accident, it would become a deliberate choice. Ancient civilizations would have the ability to cross vast oceans intentionally, opening the door to transoceanic contact thousands of years earlier than recorded history suggests. In our timeline, encounters between distant continents happened late and often by chance, shaped by storms, drifting ships, or extraordinary risk-taking. With modern navigation, oceans would feel measurable and predictable. Sailors could calculate routes, estimate travel time, and plan return journeys with confidence. This would make crossing open water a challenge, not a mystery. As a result, civilizations separated by oceans would begin interacting much sooner. Goods, ideas, and knowledge would travel across the world long before later historical eras. Agricultural techniques, architectural styles, and systems of writing could spread between continents instead of developing in isolation. Cultural exchange would accelerate, shaping societies in ways that feel surprisingly modern. These early connections would also change how people understood one another. Distant lands would no longer seem mythical or unreachable. Foreign cultures would be known through shared contact rather than rumors and legends. Over time, curiosity would replace suspicion, and familiarity would replace fear. Crucially, these encounters would not feel like dramatic moments of discovery. There would be no sudden realization that an entire continent existed beyond the ocean. Instead, contact would unfold gradually, through repeated journeys and growing familiarity. History would be shaped by long-term relationships rather than singular events. By connecting continents early, humanity's story would become more unified. Civilizations would grow alongside one another, aware of the wider world and their place within it. The oceans, once barriers of separation, would become the threads that quietly wove human history together. Once oceans became reliable routes rather than dangerous barriers, the limits of empire would change completely. Ancient powers would no longer be constrained by geography in the way history shows us. Seas and vast distances would stop being natural borders and start becoming strategic pathways for expansion. In the ancient world, empires rose and fell largely within connected landmasses. Even the most powerful states struggled to control distant territories because communication and travel were slow and uncertain. With modern navigation, rulers could plan long-distance expeditions, manage supply lines, and maintain contact with faraway regions. Control would no longer depend on proximity alone. This shift would allow empires to extend their influence across oceans. Coastal settlements could evolve into overseas provinces rather than isolated outposts. These regions would remain connected to the center through regular travel, shared maps, and predictable routes. Authority could be enforced, trade regulated, and culture shared across vast distances. As empires grew larger, their character would change. Power would rely less on brute force and more on organization, logistics, and information. Knowing where resources were located and how to reach them efficiently would become just as important as military strength. Strategy would expand from land-based control to global coordination. However, expansion on this scale would also bring new challenges. Governing diverse populations across oceans would require diplomacy, local adaptation, and cooperation. Empires that failed to manage this complexity might fracture, while those that succeeded could endure far longer than any ancient empire we know. By breaking free from continental limits, ancient empires could become truly global. History would no longer be shaped by isolated regional powers, but by vast networks of influence stretching across the known world. As empires expanded across oceans, warfare would evolve alongside them. In the ancient world, military campaigns were limited not only by enemy resistance, but by distance, timing, and supply. Armies often failed simply because they could not be fed, reinforced, or guided accurately. Modern navigation would remove many of these uncertainties. With precise positioning and reliable routes, military forces could move with purpose rather than improvisation. Commanders would know exactly where their units were and how long it would take for reinforcements or supplies to arrive. Campaigns could be planned months or even years in advance, reducing the chaos that often defined ancient warfare. Naval power would become especially important. Fleets could travel across open seas without hugging coastlines, allowing faster and more flexible movement. Strategic locations, ports, islands, and narrow sea passages would gain new significance as centers of control. Whoever mastered navigation would dominate not just land, but the routes that connected the world. This increased organization would change how conflicts unfolded. Battles would rely more on coordination and timing than on sheer numbers. Surprises would come from strategy rather than geography. Victory would favor those who understood logistics, communication, and planning on a large scale. At the same time, the cost of war would rise. Well-organized campaigns could reach farther and last longer, affecting regions that once felt safely distant. Conflict would no longer be a local event, it would have global consequences even in the ancient world. In this way, navigation would not simply make warfare more effective. It would transform it into a structured, far-reaching system, reshaping power and conflict across the early human world. With reliable navigation guiding ships across vast distances, trade would no longer be limited to neighboring regions. Ancient merchants could travel confidently between continents, creating stable and repeatable trade routes that connected the world far earlier than history records. In reality, ancient trade depended heavily on proximity and luck. Rare goods moved slowly, passing through many hands before reaching distant markets. Modern navigation would compress this process. Traders could plan direct routes, calculate travel times, and return regularly, turning long-distance exchange into a dependable system rather than a risky adventure. As a result, resources would circulate more efficiently. Metals, spices, textiles, and agricultural products could reach new regions in greater quantities. Areas rich in natural resources would gain influence, while regions focused on craftsmanship and innovation would thrive through exchange. Economic specialization would emerge sooner, reshaping how societies developed. Trade is more than the movement of goods, it is the movement of ideas. Along these early global routes, knowledge would travel just as quickly as material wealth. Mathematics, engineering techniques, artistic styles, and scientific observations would spread between civilizations, allowing each culture to build upon the discoveries of others. This constant exchange would encourage cooperation as much as competition. Agreements, standards, and shared expectations would begin to form, laying early foundations for international systems. Trust would become valuable currency, and stability would benefit everyone involved. By linking distant societies through commerce, navigation would turn the ancient world into an interconnected network. Instead of isolated economies rising and falling alone, human progress would accelerate through shared access to resources, ideas, and opportunity. As global trade routes became stable and frequent, the flow of knowledge would accelerate alongside commerce. Ideas that once took centuries to travel between regions could move in a single generation. Modern navigation would transform innovation from a local achievement into a shared human process. In ancient history, many civilizations made remarkable discoveries independently, often unaware that similar ideas already existed elsewhere. With regular contact across continents, these discoveries would no longer remain isolated. Mathematical systems, engineering methods, and scientific observations could be compared, refined, and improved through collaboration rather than coincidence. This exchange would create powerful chains of innovation. One society's breakthrough could become another's foundation. Techniques for construction, agriculture, and medicine would evolve faster as knowledge spread widely instead of remaining confined to specific regions. Progress would feel continuous rather than fragmented. Written records would also gain new importance. Accurate maps, technical manuals, and observational data could be shared and updated over time. Knowledge would become cumulative, with each generation building more directly on the last. Errors would be corrected sooner, and successful ideas would spread quickly. As innovation accelerated, societies would begin to value education and learning more deeply. Centers of study could emerge along major routes, drawing scholars from different cultures. These early hubs of knowledge would encourage critical thinking and experimentation, strengthening a more rational understanding of the world. By speeding up the exchange of ideas, navigation would quietly reshape human progress. Instead of civilizations advancing at different speeds, humanity would move forward together, learning faster, building smarter, and reaching new levels of understanding far earlier than history records. As knowledge and innovation spread more freely, the overall pace of human progress would increase in ways that feel almost unreal by historical standards. Navigation would not directly create new technologies, but it would allow existing ideas to combine, evolve, and mature far more quickly than in isolated societies. In real history, progress often stalled because civilizations had to solve the same problems repeatedly. With early global connection, solutions would be shared instead of rediscovered. Techniques for energy use, mechanical tools, and large-scale construction could advance step by step rather than starting over in different regions. This acceleration might lead to complex technologies appearing much earlier than expected. Systems for manufacturing, transportation, and infrastructure could develop centuries ahead of schedule. Urban planning would improve, productivity would rise, and societies could support larger populations with fewer resources. Economic growth would reinforce this momentum. As efficiency increased, more time and effort could be devoted to experimentation, learning, and refinement. Innovation would no longer be the result of rare genius alone, but of sustained collaboration across cultures. However, faster progress would also bring new challenges. Rapid change could strain social structures and traditions. Societies would need to adapt quickly, balancing innovation with stability. Those unable to adjust might fall behind, while adaptable cultures would thrive. Still, the overall effect would be unmistakable. Humanity would move through stages of development at a speed never seen in ancient times. What took thousands of years in our timeline might unfold in mere centuries, reshaping the human story long before the modern era begins. As the world became accurately mapped and widely known, the role of myth in explaining geography would slowly change. In ancient times, legends filled the gaps where knowledge ended. Distant lands were imagined as places of wonders or dangers because no one could confirm what truly existed beyond familiar routes. With modern navigation, those gaps would disappear. Seas, mountains, and continents could be measured, recorded, and revisited. Stories based on uncertainty would lose their influence as direct experience replaced speculation. The unknown would shrink, and with it, the need to explain the world through fear or fantasy. This shift would not erase mythology entirely. Cultural stories and symbolic beliefs would still hold meaning, but they would no longer define how people understood the physical world. Geography would become a subject of observation rather than imagination. Accuracy would matter more than tradition when describing distant places. As a result, societies would begin to trust evidence over rumor. Navigation data, maps, and recorded journeys would carry authority. This mindset would encourage careful observation and verification, laying early foundations for scientific thinking. The world would feel more predictable, governed by patterns that could be studied and understood. This change in perspective would influence how humans saw themselves. Instead of living in a mysterious and threatening landscape, people would recognize that they inhabited a structured and knowable planet. Confidence would replace fear, and curiosity would be driven by understanding rather than myth. By turning mystery into measurement, navigation would quietly reshape human thought. The transition from legend to knowledge would mark a major step toward a more rational view of the world. As accurate navigation reshaped how people understood the planet, it would also change how they explained reality itself. When measurements, records, and repeatable journeys proved reliable, societies would begin to favor observation and reasoning over assumption. This shift would encourage a more scientific way of thinking far earlier than in recorded history. Navigation depends on consistency. Routes must be tested, distances confirmed, and results compared over time. This habit of verification would spread beyond travel into other areas of life. People would apply the same logic to studying the stars, weather patterns, seasons, and natural forces. Understanding would come from evidence, not tradition alone. With repeated exposure to accurate data, trust in systematic observation would grow. Scholars would compare findings across regions, identifying patterns that hold true everywhere. This shared framework would allow knowledge to be refined collectively, reducing error and strengthening understanding. Education would evolve alongside this mindset. Learning would focus more on explanation and cause rather than myth and authority. Curiosity would be encouraged, and questioning accepted ideas would become a pathway to progress rather than a threat to order. Over time, this approach would influence governance, engineering, and daily life. Decisions would rely more on tested knowledge and planning. Infrastructure, agriculture, and medicine would benefit from predictable systems and informed experimentation. By grounding human understanding in evidence and repeatability, navigation would help push civilizations toward a scientific worldview much earlier. This change would not happen suddenly, but once it began, it would steadily reshape how humanity interpreted the world and its place within it. As civilizations became aware of one another through reliable navigation, interaction on a global scale would become unavoidable. With clear routes and predictable travel, distant societies would no longer exist beyond reach. This closeness would bring both opportunity and tension much earlier in human history. Competition for resources, strategic locations, and trade dominance would intensify. Powerful states could project influence across oceans, affecting regions that once felt safely distant. Conflicts would no longer remain local, as actions in one part of the world could ripple outward through connected networks. At the same time, constant contact would make cooperation necessary. Trade agreements, shared routes, and mutual security would encourage negotiation. Diplomatic relationships would emerge not as rare exceptions, but as essential tools for stability. Understanding foreign cultures would become valuable, reducing misunderstandings that often lead to conflict. Rules and expectations could begin to form across regions. Standards for trade, navigation, and conduct at sea might develop to protect shared interests. Trust would become as important as power, since long-distance relationships depend on reliability. Cultural exchange would also soften boundaries. Repeated interaction would create familiarity, making distant societies feel less unknown and less threatening. While conflict would still occur, it would exist alongside efforts to maintain balance and cooperation. By bringing civilizations into constant contact, navigation would accelerate both rivalry and unity. Humanity would face global challenges earlier, learning sooner that survival and progress depend not only on strength, but on collaboration across the world. With constant contact between civilizations, human history would no longer unfold in isolated chapters. Instead of separate timelines developing independently across continents, events would influence one another from an early stage. Navigation would turn humanity into a connected system rather than a collection of distant worlds. In real history, many civilizations rose and fell without knowing much about others beyond their region. With early global awareness, this separation would fade. Major discoveries, conflicts, and transformations in one area would be known elsewhere, shaping decisions far beyond their point of origin. History would feel continuous rather than fragmented. Cultural development would also change. Art, language, architecture, and traditions would influence one another through long-term exchange. While differences would remain, no civilization would evolve entirely alone. Shared references and mutual awareness would create a sense of participation in a wider human story. This interconnectedness would affect how people understood identity. Instead of defining themselves only by local geography, societies might recognize their place within a global network. Belonging would extend beyond borders, shaped by exchange and interaction rather than isolation. Crucially, there would be fewer historical gaps. Many mysteries that exist today lost knowledge, sudden advancements, unexplained similarities might never arise. With shared records and communication, progress would leave clearer traces, and understanding the past would be easier. By linking humanity early on, navigation would transform history itself. The story of human civilization would not be a puzzle assembled centuries later, but a visible, connected journey unfolding in real time, one world, one timeline, shaped by shared movement across the planet. When we step back and look at the full picture, one thing becomes clear. Modern navigation would not simply help ancient people travel farther, it would fundamentally change how humanity developed. By removing uncertainty, it would connect continents, accelerate knowledge, reshape power, and turn isolated civilizations into parts of a single, shared system. The world would feel smaller much earlier. Progress would move faster, history would become more interconnected, and humanity's story would unfold as a continuous journey rather than separate chapters written in isolation. Some challenges would arrive sooner, but so would understanding, cooperation, and shared growth. Navigation, at its core, is about direction. And once humans know where they are and where they can go, the course of history can change forever. Thank you for exploring this question with us today. If you enjoyed this journey through time and possibility, do not forget to like, share, and follow for more stories that challenge the way we see the past. Until next time, keep wondering and keep exploring.